Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The UK's leading child protection officer has suggested that paedophiles who view indecent images of children should not be jailed. Simon Bailey is the National Police Chiefs Council lead for child protection. He says increasing reports of sexual abuse mean that police need to concentrate their resources on the offenders who pose the highest risk.
We have got to the point whereby the volumes continue to grow, the number of referrals from other agencies continue to grow exponentially, and we have to look at how we manage the risk, how we are protecting children in the most efficient and effective way. And I'm certainly not talking about not arresting them. I'm certainly not talking about not then putting them on the sex offenders register, because I am absolutely committed to doing that. But what we need to do is we need to be able to create capacity within the whole of the system, that's the justice system with the Crown Prosecution Service, and within our courts, for us to focus on the people who pose a real threat of rape and serious sexual assaults.
Let's bring in our Home Affairs correspondent Mark White, should we? Hello to you, Mark. Controversial? What sort of support does he have?
It's certainly controversial. He knows it's controversial. Already the Home Office have come out with a statement today saying that the viewing of indecent images of children online or anywhere else is a terrible crime and it should be treated accordingly. But as far as Simon Bailey is concerned, he says that the criminal justice system is really just creaking under the strain of the increased number of cases that they're having to deal with. Really, post-Savile, I suppose, this whole issue of child abuse is front and centre. It's much more high profile. There has been a huge increase, 80% in the last 3 years alone, in the number of cases that the police are getting involved in. Some 1,800 investigations are being launched each month by police forces across the country and the National Crime Agency. And that means, of course, if they go forward to a prosecution, that they have to go to build a case. They have to put a lot of investigatory work into that particular process. Then, of course, the case has to go through the courts. And if someone is subsequently jailed, then they are taking up spaces within the prison system as well, which, as we know, is already at capacity at the moment. So what Simon Bailey wants, Kay, is just a smarter approach that he thinks would work, whereby there would be this emphasis on rehabilitation, that people who commit this offence would still be in the sex offenders register, but they wouldn't be going through the criminal justice system as such. They'd be going through a rehabilitation programme instead.
Okay, Mark, for now, thank you. Marilyn Hawes, regular contributor to the programme, is the founder of the charity Enough Abuse UK. Joins me now, as you can see. Hello to you.
Hello.
What do we make of that then?
Well, I wonder what he's doing as the lead child protection police officer for the National Police Council. I think what he said is irresponsible. I think it's dangerous. You don't know where this is going to go, because the people who are looking at this stuff, how much harsher does it get? How much, hardcore does it get? He's saying paedophiles. Does he mean people that just look as well? Or paedophiles? Not all abusers are paedophiles. And where is he scaling this? It is absolutely fundamentally ridiculous. When it goes wrong, who's going to be culpable? What he is saying is sending a wrong message. He's minimising what is a massive problem in this country. Now, he's overstretched, but that's not the point. You don't minimise the risk.
So what he's saying is that we are stretched thin enough as it is. We cannot be stretched any thinner, otherwise we'll be at breaking point. So as a result, what we need to do is focus on those that are abusing children.
Well, if this was your child, and you were seeing your child, and you found out tonight that your child was being raped, had been put on an abuse image, how would that make you feel if someone said, oh, well, that person was low risk, oh, that doesn't really matter? You would want that person in jail. I think, I'm sorry, we have to have a zero tolerance here. Sorry, it is a massive problem, the internet, with child abuse images. It is huge, and you cannot minimise it because you are overstretched. Theresa May needs to find some more money, I'm sorry, and to say his risk assessment sorts it out, you never know anyone what's going to on behind their eyes, and you don't know what the trigger will be. In the same way, look, an alcoholic may go 6-7 years when they're dry. Something suddenly clicks. You don't know. It's a very emotive subject. It's a very difficult, sensitive, complex subject. What makes someone trigger? Is it their low emotional intelligence? Suddenly they feel lonely, suddenly they got low esteem. You know, you can't make this look like it doesn't matter. It is a massive problem. And if you knew what category A and category B and category C looks like, just because someone's been caught with what he may consider low risk, it doesn't mean they're not watching higher risk stuff elsewhere. Okay. And I think it's dangerous. I think it's irresponsible. I really do.
Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it. Joined now from our central London studio by the Head of Participation at the NSPCC, Emily Cherry. Hello to you, Emily. Thank you for joining us. You've heard what he had to say. What's your response to that?
So at the NSPCC, we believe that prison is vital in both protecting children, in acting as a deterrent, and in helping victims see their offenders brought to justice. But it really should be teamed with rehabilitation. If we're going to prevent more child abuse, we need to make sure offenders don't reoffend and that their behaviour is changed. So prison is vital, but we also want to see more rehabilitation as well. OK. He is in post at the moment. He's in situ at the moment. What do you think that the Home Secretary should be keeping him in post? So I don't think we would comment on an individual Chief Constable and his position there. What we are absolutely saying at the NSPCC is that we want to make sure that all police have the powers to bring any offenders to justice, and any decisions and risks that are posed by offenders to children are literally brought to justice through the criminal justice system.
Yeah, but he is the man that oversees what should happen as far as paedophiles are concerned. So you, as we've heard, you're not at all content with what's happened. So how can he stay in post? So I think what's really critical here is that we need to make sure that every child is at the heart of every decision. Behind every child abuse image, there is a victim. So the police need the resources and the powers to make sure that children are protected and offenders are brought to justice. We wouldn't comment on whether or not a Chief Constable should keep his job. That's very much for the Home Secretary to decide. OK, so just to clarify, though, what he is saying does not help protect children online. So we are saying that there is protection. What he is saying is right, that there is rehabilitation that is needed to support offenders, to stop them from reoffending. And prison is not the only solution to helping protect from child sexual abuse. OK, we've heard from Yvette Cooper. She says she's greatly concerned about the suggestion that paedophiles who are viewing these indecent images of children shouldn't be put in jail. I suppose the other major concern is that if they're not put in jail, one wonders what might happen next. In fact, we were speaking to a woman on our programme a little bit earlier on today, and she was basically saying that it's a little bit like, and I don't know what you think about this at the NSPCC, so it'd be interesting to have your view. Her view is that it's a little bit like being an alcoholic. You might stay off a drink for 6 years, but you could succumb at any time if there isn't that threat of jail. So the threat has to be there. Prison is a deterrent, and it is vital when the public need to be protected. So if there is indications that that is a high-risk offender who will continue to abuse children, then prison is the solution. But rehabilitation is possible with adult sex offenders, and that's why it's important that we have both the deterrent, police have the powers to investigate, and that rehabilitation is offered. But there's also things as well that members of the public can do. So we can have parental conversations with children to help them understand sexual abuse from a young age, in an age-appropriate way, using the NSPCC's underwear rule. We could have schools having much better conversations around sexual abuse. So there's lots more that can be done. OK, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Sky News.
Now, when it comes to criminal justice, there are two reasonable-sounding propositions that are in conflict with each other. One says that all significant crimes should be properly investigated and punished. The other says resources should be focused on the most serious crimes or dangerous offenders. Now, the police have to weigh up these two every day, but one Chief Constable made explicit the tensions between them with respect to crimes of abuse of children, suggesting today that those who view indecent images but go no further should not be jailed but rehabilitated.
This does not mean that the offender doesn't get arrested, because I would recommend they absolutely do. But there is, I believe, a space here for the effective use of rehabilitation, the fact that organisations like Lucy Faithfull Foundation, with programmes they have, are able to demonstrate they have a positive impact upon men who have unhealthy thoughts around children, And this is around saying we need to target our resources against those people who are intent in committing the most awful forms of abuse.
Well, Chief Constable Bailey, who you heard there, is the head of Operation Hydrant, which is investigating multiple allegations of historic sexual abuse across the UK. His comments have prompted quite a debate. So is there such a thing as a low-risk paedophile? Jim Gamble, as a senior police officer, was the founding chief executive of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre. He now serves on a number of local authority child safeguarding boards. And Dr. Heather Wood is a consultant adult psychotherapist at the Portman Clinic in London, which is part of the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust. Thank you both for joining us. Can we think about the numbers? I mean, Jim, do you have any idea what the numbers are in this category of people who look at indecent images but go no further?
Well, I don't think anyone knows, and that's part of the problem. We know from exercises carried out using software called the Child Protection System, used to be Peer Precision. In 2012, CEOP estimated about 60 to 70,000 people at any given time could be downloading images. In last November, Simon Bailey himself was saying he estimated it could be up to 100,000, and that figure is extrapolated upwards, but lots of it is based on guesstimate. The figures of 100,000 and 60 are actually based on software that monitors particular images being downloaded to IP addresses.
I've heard much higher figures than that, like sort of 500,000 plus or something like that. And you don't believe those? You think those are
it's not that I don't believe them. There are figures where the NSPCC, for example, in some combined studies, extrapolate those figures out to 750,000. But the bottom line is, you know, it's how we deter people from going online.
I understand. I just want to know how many we're talking about, because in terms of the practicality of sending people to jail, 750,000's a lot. Heather, do you have prevalence rates of paedophilia? I mean, I know that covers quite a wide spectrum of different conditions, but do you know what the numbers are?
I don't know what the percentages are.
No. I mean, if we went through a policy of rehabilitation, how successful is that? I mean, how?
I think you have to think that paedophilia is essentially a mental health diagnosis. So we have to make a distinction between people who offend against children, which is the business of the criminal justice system, and people who have a paedophilic sexual interest in children. So some of the people who offend against children are not actually consistently paedophilic in their sexual orientation. There are some people who are paedophilic who never enact with children. And I think we now know, as a result of the behaviour that we've observed in relation to the internet, that there are some people who have made adult-to-adult intimate relationships, but actually, under the influence of immersion in internet sex, actually break down to express a more explicitly paedophilic sexual interest. So I think these are very different groups of people.
Right. And do you accept that there are these categories, Jim?
No, I don't, because when it comes to managing risk, that's not been my experience. So if I'm someone who goes online and views images of children, Simon's hypothesis is that those looking at very low-level images perhaps represent a lower risk. Well, that's not been my experience. I've seen individuals who are looking at the lowest form of image who have committed the most horrendous crimes. And I can give you examples of those individuals. So if we're going to base our risk management regime on that basis, then you're playing the lottery with children's lives.
Right. Is that fair?
Yes, I agree with Jim on this point.
So you can't tell the difference between...
You can't tell the difference on the basis of the nature of the images that people are looking at. So we've seen people who, for example, can get sexually aroused by looking at mother care catalogues. You know, this doesn't actually differentiate between high and low level offenders, but there are other criteria that can be
Can you
used.
distinguish between high and low level, high risk and low risk offenders?
I think there are, both from research evidence and from our clinical experience, we're starting to develop an awareness of what the criteria are.
And is that good enough, though, for us to say, well, you're low risk, so we'll treat you differently from someone who we think is high risk?
Yeah.
You think it is good enough?
Yeah, and I think there are researchers who are actually developing and refining reliable tools.
And can I push you?
Right
I mean, do you have any idea what your kind of error rate is? And we're probably going to have to accept there are some risks always in every case, but do you know what your error rate is? If you think this person is not likely to offend against a child, Are you wrong 1% of the time, 0.1% of the time?
I don't know.
You say you don't know.
Well, in the study that Heather herself took part in, where they looked at 20 offenders over a 10-year period of time, one who dropped out went on to reoffend. But that is, one dropped out was caught reoffending. So the issue is here, you're talking about the best liars in the world. And let me put this in context. You know, Simon's delivering the wrong message to the wrong people at the wrong time. Mums and dads and carers at home are anxious enough about this. To talk about it in blasé terms about counselling is a mistake. His message should be to the government to say there are too many offenders and too few police.
We can't put another 100,000 people in jail.
Well, actually, we convicted 55,000 people in 2012, 2013 for drunken driving, convicted. That means we investigated a lot more. So we're being seduced into a position to say, well, actually, the numbers are too big. The numbers are not too big. If we were talking about terrorism, we'd be investing resource. We'd be investing assets and money into getting better at this. So we need to identify them. And the thing is this, the child sex abuse inquiry is taking evidence. Those people who are currently going to bed, you know, demented tonight by the legacy of pain they have in the past could have been better protected if we had taken the numbers more seriously in days gone by. And we cannot have this.
We need to leave it there. Thanks.
Simon Bailey of the National Police Chiefs Council sparked a storm of comment and criticism this week after he said that not everyone who views images of child abuse online should be prosecuted. The chair of the Home Affairs Committee, Yvette Cooper, says she wants to know how he can be sure that those at low risk of going on to commit physical offences can be identified by the police. In his interview on this programme, Simon Bailey mentioned the work of the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, which has a treatment programme for those arrested for looking at child pornography online. Our reporter Sancha Berg has been talking to one man who's been through it.
David, not his real name, was arrested last year for downloading child abuse images. His words are spoken by a producer.
I was broadening the range to find more new things to keep my pornography habit going, and eventually that started leading me into more and more extreme areas with sort of sexual violence and also sorts of things that were obviously very wrong, including images of children and abuse of children. That was the tail end extreme of my 20 years increasing use of pornography, as I see it, and that's when it sort of maxed out.
He'd become addicted, couldn't break the habit.
There were times when I stepped out of my bubble and sort of looked at myself and thought, what's going on? I'm supposed to be a good moral person. How can I be looking at this? And I'd move away from it. But there seemed to be this draw to go back.
Then the police knocked on his door early one morning.
When I got arrested, I thought, now this has been exposed. I thought the worst. But it wasn't the arrest that made me realise what I'd done. It was when I picked up the phone and talked to someone who really understood this, who explained that what I was doing was having an impact on increasing the abuse of children. That was a huge shock. You feel so far removed from it. It's just me and my computer. And realising the act of downloading stimulates this industry was a huge turning point for me.
He was helped by the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, which runs a 10-step programme for offenders like David. It can start soon after their arrest, months before court. Donald Findlater is the foundation spokesman.
Primarily, it's giving information, challenging some dialogue around that in a group context with other individuals who've done the same crime, albeit in their personally different circumstances. So the man can then attend a 10-session programme in 4, 6, 8 weeks' time, potentially before he's ever seen the inside of a court or being cautioned by the police.
The foundation strongly supports comments by Simon Bailey, National Police Chiefs Council lead for child protection. He told us earlier this week that police were overwhelmed by the numbers of such offenders, an estimated 100,000 people. He said that while all those who view child abuse images online should be arrested, those considered low risk should not face criminal prosecution but be given counselling and rehabilitation instead. It's controversial. The Internet Watch Foundation said it amounted to saying, "This is a great day to be a paedophile." The chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Yvette Cooper, has asked for reassurance that police are not planning to change their approach straight away, and for the evidence.
I'm Jackie Cressati, consultant clinical and forensic psychologist.
Dr. Cressati has worked with sex offenders for decades.
If we look at those who haven't previously offended in a sexual way, then we're really pretty confident that they are very low risk. They're low risk for doing it again, but they're even lower risk for escalating to touching children. And what we know about therapy for those individuals, pretty clear evidence that therapy or treatment interventions do not make low-risk people even lower risk. We're not effective.
What does work is being found out.
Key issue for those individuals seems to be catching them and taking them to court. So an effective kind of disclosure, it's a catalyst in a way for an individual to, you could describe it as, come to their senses.
According to the research, only 5% of people are likely to go back to viewing online images of child abuse. 1 in 100 is likely to move on to so-called contact offences, touching children.
Of course, these are not things we can be complacent about, but when we're really trying to work with reducing reoffending, these are very, very low figures. And actually, with the best science in the world, we start to struggle to work out who is that one person going to be.
That report from Sancha Berg. Tim Lawton MP is on the Home Affairs Select Committee and is a former Minister for Children and Families. He's in our radio car. Good morning.
Morning, Michelle.
We heard an example there of a man whose understanding of his actions was completely changed by a rehabilitation programme. Would you have a problem with that sort of approach being used more widely?
That sort of approach is used already, and I remember in my time as Children's Minister, I had to look at a lot of residual cases of sex offenders when the vetting and barring system was changing, and many of them have had programmes with the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, which does some fantastic work. But what was common to the cases I saw is that many low-level viewing of images is how it started off, and then went on to more serious things. And one thing, it was quite interesting, the comment by the clinician you had just now, is in many cases those people are actually in denial about the seriousness or the extent of what they had done. And one had to look at those cases where there was a prospect of this person was not properly rehabilitated at all. It was very difficult to determine that. And I think that's why we must have a proper deterrent, that you will be arrested and charged, and to downgrade that is not sending out the right message.
OK, but if you're interested in reducing the reoffending, it seems from the expert you're referring to, who was in that report, Dr. Jackie Cressati, she says only 1 in 100 people who are first-time offenders and who are caught for looking at these images go on to commit contact offences. So those are people that arguably can be identified and can be stopped from reoffending by using this approach rather than being prosecuted.
And these are the ones we know about. But what she also said is that what really works is a realisation that you're going to get caught, and there are serious implications from it. I think, let me just preface my comments by saying I think Simon Bailey has done an extraordinary job in the Police Chiefs Council of raising the whole profile of child sexual abuse, training police to detect it and to process it and to expose these people and bring them to book. And they are dealing with something like 70,000 cases of child sex abuse every year. So this is a big, big problem. But you don't deal with that problem by saying that there are a number of paedophiles actually where we're going to downgrade the seriousness of what you do, and they won't be charged. Why not? He said there are over 400 arrests a month for offences related to viewing indecent images. Well, there are 1,250 arrests a month for fraud, 6,500 for drug offences. So why is this so much less serious? We deal with it in a very different way. I think it's the wrong message going out.
Well, and indeed, that was part of what Yvette Cooper, the chair of your committee, said in her letter to Simon Bailey. You know, perhaps the other things, though, that can be taken into context when you compare statistics in that way, arguably there's a different level of investigation that goes into some of those other types of offences compared to child abuse, and also we don't know of the comparison in terms of the risk of reoffending, whereas it does seem that there is a low risk of reoffending or escalating to contact offences for these sorts of offenders.
Yeah, and we also don't know the full extent of the problem, because a lot of this is still going on beneath the radar. And as I said, in the cases that I had to view as Minister before, too many cases, there was a link to more serious offending afterwards. And in too many cases, people who had been through rehabilitation, for many it is very successful, but for some they were still in denial about the extent of the crimes they had committed. And viewing indecent images online is not a victimless crime. It means that a child has been abused on the other end of a camera lens. Just because you're not in the same room as that child does not make this any less serious an abuse of that child. And
Indeed.
we've got to absolutely stand firm about that.
And that's why the offender in that report, that was exactly the understanding that he said he had for the first time after going through this treatment program. Let me then go back to the question I asked you right at the beginning. Are you saying that you would have a problem with expanding these sorts of programs and with more people not going through the full criminal justice process?
I'm absolutely not saying I wouldn't expand these programs, but these programs should be running in parallel with the full process of the law taking place, so that people are arrested and they are charged, and these programs happen before they're charged and then after they're charged as well. But reducing the severity of the offence by saying, well, this isn't going to lead to criminal charges, you're not going to get a present offence, is not a proper deterrent. We need both things in order to clamp down on this horrendous crime that's going on.
Do you think there is already something different that's happening in whether you call it a more lax approach or a different approach? There was a report this week that said over 2,000 offenders have been let off with cautions for possessing indecent images of children.
Well, we need to know, and that's one of the reasons why the chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee has written to Simon Bailey for clarification of exactly what he's suggesting, because the police seem to have changed their view on these assessments. Some years ago they said that making assessments of how dangerous or how high risk these people pose to children was very difficult. Well, I agree with that for the reasons I've already given. So what has changed that now they're able to make this much easier assessment that this person is not dangerous or at risk to children? We don't know. This must be evidence-based, but absolutely it must not send out a wrong message that viewing pictures, indecent images of minors online is in some way crime-light. It's not. There's a victim at the other end of that camera lens.
Tim Lawton MP, thank you.